My name is Eva Langford, and until recently, I thought my biggest achievement was building Langford Secure Systems from a two-person startup into a global cybersecurity powerhouse, all before my 35th birthday. I was wrong. My biggest achievement, it turns out, was surviving my own family. I just discovered the real reason why they sold my home out from under me while I was closing the biggest deal of my career, a deal that should have been a moment of pure triumph. They thought I was just their backup plan, their ATM, their invisible daughter, forever orbiting their precious failing legacy. But there were multiple truths they were about to uncover, truths I'd meticulously woven over years of silent observation and strategic planning. The betrayal cut deeper than any cyber attack I'd ever thwarted, striking at the core of who I thought I was to them, forcing a vulnerability I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. That day, I had no idea that one casually cruel email would detonate the carefully constructed facade of our family and my own carefully guarded heart. They thought I'd never uncover the truth about their desperation, their deceit, or their staggering underestimation of me. The moment I found out what they really thought of me, what they were capable of, was the moment everything changed. If you've ever felt systematically underestimated, dismissed, or taken for granted by the very people who should have championed you, comment and subscribe. Because this isn't just my story. It's for anyone who's ever been made to feel small so others could feel big. Trust me, if you're the black sheep, the overachiever who's never quite good enough, or the one always picking up the pieces while being told you're not holding them right, this story will change how you see family loyalty and the sweet, sweet taste of justice forever. To understand the depth of the chasm that opened, you need to understand the landscape of my childhood. I grew up in the sprawling, slightly faded grandeur of a London townhouse that always seemed to smell faintly of old money and new anxieties. My father, Richard Langford, was the CEO of Langford Innovations, a tech company founded by his father, a man whose shadow Richard seemed perpetually trying to escape, or perhaps emulate too closely. Langford Innovations had once been a pioneer in early business hardware, but the innovations in its name had become more aspirational than actual. Father was charismatic, a man who could charm a room, but his business acumen was rooted in a bygone era. He saw my older brother Michael as his direct heir, the one to carry the Langford torch. Me, I was Eva, the quiet one, the one who'd probably marry well and produce respectable grandchildren. My mother, Eleanor Langford, was the VP of Public Relations at Langford Innovations. Her role, both professionally and personally, was to maintain appearances. She was impeccably dressed, socially adept, and her public displays of affection for Michael were legendary within our small social circle. Privately, she often leaned on me for a listening ear when Father was being difficult, for help, organizing family events, for a quiet competence she seemed to take for granted. She was a woman terrified of losing her social standing, a fear that often translated into a laser focus on Michael's projected success and a benign neglect of my own. Michael. 2 years my senior, he possessed a superficial charm and an uncanny ability to coast. He was crowned CTO of Langford Innovations, not through any discernible technical prowess, but by virtue of his surname and gender. He was the golden boy, and the gold, it seemed, was expected to rub off on him without him needing to mine any of it himself. He wasn't unintelligent, but he was profoundly lazy, accustomed to having his path smoothed and his mistakes quietly rectified by others, often by an anxious father or a long-suffering engineer at LI. My earliest memories are of feeling like a ghost in my own home. I was an observer, a listener. While Michael was paraded around, his every crayon drawing praised as a masterpiece, I was tucked away in corners with books on logic, or later a secondhand computer my uncle had discarded, teaching myself to code. I remember being 8 and solving a complex puzzle box meant for adults. My father glanced at it, said, "That's nice, dear," and immediately turned back to Michael, who had just managed to kick a football through a greenhouse pane. The football incident prompted concern, a flurry of activity, and a new, better football. My puzzle box was forgotten on the coffee table. This pattern of favoritism was the wallpaper of my upbringing. When it came time for university, Michael's application to an expensive out-of-state business school, where he achieved thoroughly mediocre grades, was met with enthusiastic financial backing and pronouncements about investing in the future of Langford innovations. My scholarship to Imperial College for Computer Science and Engineering was met with relief. "Oh, good, Eva, that's a sensible choice, and a scholarship, very practical of you." The implication was clear. My education was a cost to be minimized, his an investment to be maximized. The disparity continued. For his 21st birthday, Michael received a sleek new sports car, a gleaming testament to his perceived status. When I learned to drive, I inherited the family's decade-old Volvo station wagon, affectionately nicknamed the Tank. Reliable, but hardly a statement of parental pride. Summer jobs at Langford Innovations were another exercise in contrast. Michael was given project lead roles, which usually involved him vaguely gesturing at a whiteboard, while a team of actual engineers did the heavy lifting. I was assigned to help out in my mother's PR department, filing press clippings or fetching coffee despite my rapidly growing tech skills. Once I discreetly fixed a recurring network bug that had plagued their internal servers for weeks. When my father found out the issue was resolved, he clapped Michael on the back. "Good lad, Michael, knew you'd get to the bottom of it." Michael, to his credit, looked momentarily uncomfortable before basking in the unearned praise. I said nothing. What was the point? Family holidays were meticulously planned around Michael's social calendar, his sporting events, his fleeting interests. My preferences, if solicited at all, were an afterthought. The grand pronouncements about the Langford legacy were always directed at and about Michael. He was to be the steward of the family name in the world of business. My role, it seemed, was to be a silent, supportive spectator, perhaps occasionally offering a cup of tea. I wasn't a rebellious child. Instead, a quiet, steely resolve began to form within me. If they wouldn't see me, I would see myself. If they wouldn't invest in me, I would invest in myself. I learned to be fiercely self-reliant, to validate my own achievements, to set my own course. My quietness was mistaken for passivity, my observational nature for lack of ambition. They never realized I was a sponge absorbing every slight, every instance of casual dismissal, every unearned accolade heaped upon my brother. I was also learning, always learning, about technology, about business, about people, especially about my family. And I was beginning to see the cracks in the gilded facade of Langford Innovations long before anyone else even suspected they were there. The frustration was a slow burn building an emotional foundation, not of shared warmth, but of a dawning painful clarity. They were building their narrative around Michael. I was quietly building my own. The years between university and the founding of Langford Secure Systems were a masterclass in this established pattern. Each personal or professional milestone I achieved was met with the same lukewarm acknowledgement, always overshadowed by some drama or supposed triumph involving Michael. It was like living in a perpetual eclipse. I graduated from Imperial with first-class honors in computer science and engineering. My parents attended the ceremony. My mother dabbed her eyes. For the cameras, or for genuine emotion, I could never tell. My father shook my hand, a brief, firm grip. "Well done, Eva. Very good." Within 10 minutes, at the small reception I'd organized, the conversation had shifted. "Michael," my father announced proudly to a distant cousin, "is in talks to launch a new app, very cutting edge, social media for pet enthusiasts." The app, like Michael's 3 previous ventures, fizzled out within 6 months, leaving a trail of minor debts my father quietly settled. My first major promotion at a leading London tech firm, a significant step that put me in charge of a critical infrastructure security team, was met with a distracted, "That's lovely, dear. Impressive, some," from my mother over the phone, immediately followed by, "Now about Michael. He needs some new suits. He's networking with some venture capitalists, and appearances are so important, you know." I remember staring at the receiver, the words impressive and suits clanging discordantly in my mind. I quietly paid for Michael's suits via a loan to my mother. It was easier than arguing. The founding of Langford Secure Systems LSS should have been a moment they recognized as something substantial. I'd identified a critical niche in corporate cybersecurity secured seed funding. Not from them I wouldn't have dared ask, and poured my every waking hour into it. When I nervously told my father, he patted my arm. "A little side project, cute. Don't let it distract you too much from finding a nice young man, dear." Michael, ever the supportive sibling, scoffed. "Cybersecurity sounds incredibly boring, Eva. Who'd want to do that?" His own role as CTO of Langford Innovations had just been announced with considerable fanfare at a company dinner I wasn't invited to, despite my now obvious expertise in a relevant field. As LSS grew year on year, winning industry awards, landing FTSE 100 clients, the pattern held. My successes were nice, good for you, but never quite real in their eyes. Sometimes my father would casually suggest, "Perhaps your little company could lend Langford Innovations a hand with its IT security. Eva pro bono, of course, for the family." The irony was a bitter pill. Meanwhile, Michael's every minor achievement at LI was magnified and celebrated. A routine software patch his team implemented after weeks of delays and several critical failures he'd overseen was hailed by my father in the company newsletter as a testament to Michael's visionary leadership as CTO. I read it online, a small, cold knot forming in my stomach. My internal monologue during these years was a turbulent sea of frustration, a desperate longing for genuine recognition, and a slowly hardening anger. Am I invisible? I'd wonder late at night, staring at the glowing lines of code on my screen, the only place where logic and merit seem to rule. Or am I just a convenient resource, a background character in the grand drama of Michael Langford? The psychological impact was profound. I developed a fierce independence that sometimes bordered on isolation. I learned to compartmentalize to shield my successes from their casual dismissal, to find validation from clients from my team, from within. The pain of being perpetually overlooked by one's own family is a unique ache. It settles deep in the bones. They see what they want to see, I finally concluded, and what they want to see has nothing to do with who I truly am. So be it. Let them. Dialogue scenes from that era replay in my mind with painful clarity. I recall one Sunday lunch, a rare occasion when I wasn't traveling for LSS. I just secured a landmark contract that would double our revenue. "I finalized the deal with Sterling Bank on Friday," I said, trying to keep my voice casual, a learned defense against anticipated indifference. My father nodded slowly, chewing his roast beef. "Sterling, a good bank. Solid. Michael was just telling me about the exciting new AI direction for Langford Innovations. Apparently it's going to revolutionize inventory management." He turned to my brother. "Explain it to Eva Michael. She's in tech, she might understand some of it." Michael Fork, halfway to his mouth, looked flustered. "Oh, well, it's very complex, Dad. AI, machine learning, synergistic paradigms." He waved his hand vaguely, clearly, parroting buzzwords he barely grasped. My mother beamed at him. "So brilliant, darling." I sipped my water, the taste metallic. My multi-million-pound contract had vanished from the conversation, replaced by Michael's word salad. Another time, genuinely concerned about the outdated systems I knew LI was still using, I approached my father in his study. "Father," I began, "I've been looking at some new encryption protocols that could really bolster LI's data security. I'd be happy to walk your team through them, perhaps even develop a custom solution." He smiled a dismissive, almost pitying expression. He patted my head, a gesture he hadn't used since I was 10, and one that now felt incredibly patronizing. "Don't you worry your pretty little head about these complex business matters, sweetheart. We've been in this game a long time. Michael and I have it all under control." He turned back to his papers, the dismissal absolute. I walked out the offer stillborn on my lips, a familiar chill settling around my heart. Pretty little head, I thought. If only he knew what this pretty little head was capable of. My solace came from my work, my dedicated team at LSS, and a few close friends who had witnessed the family dynamic and offered quiet, unwavering support. One such friend, Sarah, a fellow entrepreneur I'd met at a tech conference, once said after a particularly galling family anecdote I'd shared, "Eva, they're not just overlooking you, they're actively choosing not to see you. Their loss. You're building an empire while they're busy polishing a relic." Her words were a balm. The most recent major disappointment just before the Berlin trip and the fateful email involved exactly that, my expertise being co-opted. Langford Innovations had suffered a minor but embarrassing security breach. Michael, as CTO, was floundering. Panicked, my father had uncharacteristically called me appealing to family loyalty. Against my better judgment, but moved by his genuine distress, I spent a weekend personally architecting and helping LI's shell-shocked and I suspected chronically undervalued engineers implement a robust new security framework. No charge, of course. 2 weeks later, an industry magazine ran a puff piece on Langford Innovations bouncing back from a minor hiccup, quoting my father extensively about Michael's swift and decisive action in overhauling our cybersecurity infrastructure, demonstrating his innate grasp of modern technological challenges. There was no mention of me or LSS. Michael, quoted in the same article, spoke of late nights and deep dives into threat analysis. I felt a familiar wave of weary resignation, but this time something else too, a cold spark of determination. This pattern, I realized, wasn't just going to continue. It was going to escalate until something broke, or until I broke it. Little did I know how soon that breaking point would arrive. The months leading up to the Berlin trip were like watching a slow-motion car crash I was powerless to prevent, or rather, one I was secretly preparing to salvage from the wreckage on my own terms. Langford Innovations' financial distress became increasingly undeniably apparent, despite my parents' frantic attempts to maintain a brave face. I'd overhear snippets of hushed, stressed conversations between them when I visited talk of bridging loans, creditor demands, and Michael's latest main setback. Michael, meanwhile, became more brazen. His requests for small loans for LI, just to tide us over until this big contract lands, sis, became more frequent, the sums larger. These were, of course, never repaid, never even formally acknowledged as debts. They were absorbed into the black hole of LI's failing finances, and my complicity, I knew, was silently logged by my parents as another instance of Eva, the reliable backup. When I tried to gently probe about the company's health, offering genuine strategic advice based on my own hard-won business experience, I was met with evasiveness or outright almost aggressive dismissal. "Everything's perfectly fine, darling, just a slight Q3 market adjustment." My mother would chirp, her smile a little too bright, her eyes betraying a flicker of panic. My father would bluster, "Langford Innovations has weathered worse storms than this, Eva. We don't need your input right now." Michael has a very innovative turnaround plan. Michael's plan, as far as I could gather, involved hoping for a miracle and spending money they didn't have on ill-conceived projects. Then there was the house, 317 Waverly Hill Road. It was more than bricks and mortar to me. It was my stake in the ground, my sanctuary. I'd bought the charming but dilapidated Victorian 5 years prior, a bold move on a fledgling CEO's salary. I poured my savings, my weekends, my very soul into its restoration, lovingly choosing every fixture, every paint color. The mortgage was solely in my name, a significant financial commitment. My parents had helped with a small portion of the initial deposit, a fact they'd later weaponize, conveniently forgetting the 5 years of mortgage payments I'd made, the utilities I covered, the extensive renovations I'd funded. At the time, they'd just downsized from their larger family home, another sign of LI's creeping decline I hadn't fully appreciated then, and asked if they could live at Waverly Hill. "It's too big for you on your own, Eva. You travel so much for LSS." My mother had reasoned, and we'd be there to keep an eye on things. It suited me at the time. LSS was demanding all my attention. I agreed, stipulating it was temporary. It was my house, my future. The thought of it peaceful and waiting was often what got me through grueling business trips. The desperation from my parents began to escalate. My mother called me one evening, her voice laced with an unusual, cloying sweetness. She talked about everything but the company for 20 minutes, then, as if an afterthought, "Eva, darling, your father and I were wondering, Langford Innovations is on the cusp of something truly huge, a game changer. But we need a small capital injection to get us over the line. Perhaps you'd consider investing as family." The sum she mentioned wasn't small. It was significant enough to make even LSS blink. I was wary. "I'll need to see the financials, Mother. And Michael's game-changing plan," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Of course, darling, of course," she'd trilled, though the detailed proposal never materialized. It was around this time, about a year before the Berlin trip, that my own secret plan began to take shape. My unease about LI had prompted me to do some discreet digging. What I uncovered with the help of her Newman, a sharp, discreet legal counsel LSS had on retainer, was far worse than I imagined. Langford Innovations wasn't just struggling. It was a labyrinth of bad debts, outdated patents, and catastrophic mismanagement, mostly stemming from Michael's ill-fated projects and my father's refusal to modernize or cede control. It was a house of cards trembling in a gathering wind. A strange, cold clarity settled over me. They were going to lose it all, and they were going to try and drag me down with them. But what if I could control the demolition, or better yet, the reconstruction? Newman, initially hesitant, was soon intrigued by the audacity of my proposal. Through a series of carefully constructed shell corporations funded by LSS profits and my personal investments, we began to buy up Langford Innovations' distressed debt from various creditors. It was a gamble, a high-stakes chess game played in the shadows. LE was so desperate for cash and their creditors so eager to offload the risky debt that no one noticed the disparate acquisitions slowly consolidating under one invisible umbrella. My umbrella. Little did they know I had been documenting everything. Every loan, every dismissal, every casually cruel remark. It all fueled the engine of my quiet, methodical plan. My father, Richard, knew was driven by a deep-seated fear of failing, the Langford legacy of disappointing the ghost of his own overbearing father. He clung to an outdated model of business and patriarchal succession, blinding him to Michael's incompetence and my potential. My mother, Eleanor, they suspected, had married into the Langford name and fortune from a less privileged background. Her identity and social standing were inextricably linked to the company's perceived success and her role as the matriarch of a prominent family. These weren't excuses for their behavior, but they provided a grim context for their desperation. Their fears made them reckless. The Berlin trip was the culmination of months of intense work for Langford Secure Systems. We were on the verge of signing an EU-wide cybersecurity contract, a monumental achievement that would catapult LSS into a new league. I flew to Berlin, exhausted but exhilarated. The negotiations were tough, spanning several days in sterile EU Commission meeting rooms, but my team and I were relentless. Simultaneously, Newman was back in London finalizing the last critical purchases of LI's debt. The timing was almost poetic. One evening, after a grueling 12-hour session, I returned to my hotel suite overlooking the Spree River. The city lights glittered below, a stark contrast to the sterile gray of the meeting rooms. I felt a surge of pride. This was my achievement built on merit, on relentless hard work. I had just poured myself a glass of celebratory champagne when my phone pinged with an email notification. It was from Newman. Phase 1 complete. We have controlling interest, awaiting your signal for Phase 2. A slow smile spread across my face. It was done. The safety net for LI, or rather for my version of its future, was in place. Then another email pinged. This one was from my mother. The subject line, "A little news from home." I remember feeling a prickle of unease even before I opened it. Life has its own way of getting even, and karma was already working. But not in the way they imagined. I clicked it open, a sense of weary anticipation washing over me. The contents of that email would ignite the final explosive stage of a reckoning years in the making. The email was short, almost offensively casual. It read, "Dearest Eva Hope, Berlin is going wonderfully, and the big deal is progressing smoothly. Such exciting times for you. Just a quick update from our end. Things have been rather frantic here, as you can imagine, with trying to keep Langford Innovations afloat. Your father and I, along with Michael, had to make a very, very difficult decision this week, one that was purely for the good of the family and to secure the company's future, and by extension, Michael's vital role within it. We've sold 317 Waverly Hill Road. The funds were desperately needed as an immediate injection into Langford Innovations. I know how much you love that house, dear, and this was not a step taken lightly, but I trust you understand that sometimes personal sacrifices are necessary for the greater good of the family. Family comes first always. We'll discuss all the details when you're back in London. Focus on your success in Berlin. Lots of love, Mom." I read it once, then again. The champagne glass still in my hand trembled. The words, "Sold 317 Waverly Hill Road," seemed to leap off the screen, searing themselves into my brain. My house. My house. The one I had poured my heart, my savings, 5 years of mortgage payments into. Sold. Without my knowledge, without my consent, while I was on the cusp of the biggest professional triumph of my life. A strange numbness enveloped me, a protective cocoon, against the immediate screaming agony. The city lights outside blurred. I could hear the distant thrum of Berlin, the clink of glasses from the hotel bar downstairs, but it all sounded miles away, filtered through a thick wall of disbelief. Then the numbness shattered and a white-hot rage, purer and more intense than anything I had ever experienced, flooded through me. It wasn't just the financial implications, though those were significant. It was the absolute, profound, devastating betrayal. The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it. The casual cruelty embedded in family comes first, when their definition of family so clearly excluded me as anything more than a resource to be plundered. My heart didn't just break, it shattered into 1,000 pieces, I whispered to the empty room. And then, in the silence that followed, those pieces began to reassemble not into the familiar shape of wounded affection, but into something cold, hard, and diamond-sharp. Flashbacks flickered through my mind, me covered in dust and paint, laughing as I stripped wallpaper in the master bedroom, drawing up plans for the garden I'd always wanted, the quiet satisfaction of making that first mortgage payment a symbol of my independence. They hadn't just sold bricks and mortar. They had taken my sanctuary, my dreams for that space, and sold them for a quick, desperate fix for their failing enterprise for Michael's future. The realization hit me like a freight train loaded with years of accumulated pain. They didn't just see me as secondary, they saw me as entirely expendable. My assets were their assets. My future was subservient to theirs. They didn't just sell a house. I thought the rage now chilling into an icy resolve. They sold me. They sold any last lingering shred of misguided loyalty or affection I held for their twisted version of family. The news of Newman's successful debt acquisition, received only moments before now, took on a new, savage significance. My plan to take over Langford Innovations had initially been a strategic business decision, a way to protect my earlier loans, which I knew were gifts they'd never repay, and perhaps in some small, unacknowledged corner of my heart, a way to finally prove my worth by salvaging the family legacy they were destroying. But now it was personal. Deeply, irrevocably personal. The truth would soon come to light in the most unexpected way, for them. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was about reclaiming every part of myself they had tried to diminish or steal. My hand was steady as I picked up my phone. I didn't even pause to think. The decision was already made, forged in the crucible of that single devastating email. "Her," I said, when Newman answered my voice devoid of inflection. "It's Eva. Berlin was a success, and I just received some illuminating news from my mother." "Good news, I hope?" he asked, his tone cautious. "Define good," I replied, a humorless smile touching my lips. They sold my house, Waverly Hill, apparently to bail out Langford Innovations. There was a stunned silence on the other end. Then, "They what, Eva? I'm so sorry. It's beyond the point of apology, I interrupted, my voice hardening. "The timeline for Phase 2 has just moved up. We execute now. I want everything in place for an emergency board meeting at Langford Innovations, day after tomorrow. My father has conveniently already called one to try and beg for more money. Let's give them a different kind of financial presentation." "Consider it done," Newman said, his voice now crisp and professional. "And Eva, what about the house?" "The house." A fierce protective surge went through me. "Find out who bought it. Buy it back. Whatever the price. I want the deed in my hand before that board meeting. It's non-negotiable. It'll be difficult on such short notice, possibly expensive. I don't care about difficult or expensive, I care about making a point. Make it happen." The flight back to London the next day was a blur. I moved on autopilot, my public demeanor one of calm professionalism, discussing the triumphant EU deal with my LSS team members who had flown with me. Inside, however, a storm raged. I wasn't just angry, I was energized, focused, with a terrifying clarity. They had underestimated me one last fatal time. They had mistaken my patience for weakness, my quiet endurance for acceptance. They were about to learn the difference. Instead of going to my flat, the thought of its emptiness, its lack of permanence now that Waverly Hill was gone, was unbearable. I checked into a suite at the Corinthia Hotel. It became my command center. Newman, a miracle worker, confirmed by late evening that he had tracked down the buyer of Waverly Hill, a property developer who had snapped it up for a quick flip. After some aggressive round-the-clock negotiation fueled by a significant premium, I readily authorized the developer agreed to sell it back. The digital transfer of funds and deeds would be finalized by morning. The board meeting is set for 10 a.m. tomorrow, Langford Innovations HQ, Newman confirmed in our final call that night. Richard Langford officially scheduled it to present a critical funding proposal. He has no idea what's coming. "Excellent," I said, looking out at the London skyline, a mirror image of the Berlin view from the night before, yet everything felt different. Let him make his pitch. It will be his swan song. Anticipation thrummed through me, a cold, thrilling counterpoint to the lingering ache of betrayal. They had drawn the battle lines. They just didn't realize I was already on their side of the field, holding all the strategic positions. The Langford Innovations boardroom was exactly as I remembered it from my brief, dismissive summer jobs there, mahogany paneled, smelling faintly of floor polish, and desperation dominated by a long, imposing table that had witnessed more bad decisions than breakthroughs. The air was thick with a nervous tension that even the forced bonhomie of my father couldn't quite dispel. Richard Langford, CEO, stood at the head of the table, flanked by a visibly anxious Eleanor, my mother, in her VP of PR role, and my brother Michael, CTO, who was fiddling with his tie, looking more like a nervous intern than a chief technology officer. The other half-dozen board members, mostly aging associates of my grandfather, looked weary and skeptical. They'd heard too many of Richard's optimistic recovery plans before. My father launched into his presentation, his voice attempting a confident boom that didn't quite reach the corners of the room. He spoke of synergies, untapped markets, and imminent breakthroughs, all predicated on the board approving yet another significant injection of capital. He painted a picture of Langford Innovations on the verge of a glorious comeback, a picture so divorced from reality it was almost comical. As he was winding up, gesturing towards a slide that projected wildly optimistic 5-year financial forecasts, the boardroom door opened. I walked in. I hadn't been invited to this part of the meeting, the closed session for board members only. My arrival was an interruption, a deviation from their script. I wore a bespoke sapphire blue dress the color of icy resolve, my heels clicking decisively on the polished parquet floor. Her Newman followed silently behind me, carrying a leather satchel. A hush fell over the room. My mother gasped audibly, her hand flying to her chest. My father frowned, his practiced affability cracking. "Eva, this is a closed board session. We'll be finished shortly." Actually, Father, I said, my voice calm, carrying easily in the sudden silence, I believe I have a vested interest. Several, in fact. I gestured for Newman to step forward. This is Herr Newman, my legal counsel. He has some information that I believe is pertinent to this critical funding proposal. Newman, without a word, began distributing a set of documents to each board member and then to my stunned father, mother, and brother. The silence stretched, broken only by the rustle of paper. I watched their faces. Confusion, then dawning comprehension, then disbelief. These documents, Newman announced, his voice precise and devoid of emotion, detail the recent acquisition of 62.7% of Langford Innovations' outstanding secured and unsecured debt, along with a significant portion of its distressed bonds. These acquisitions have been consolidated under a new holding company, Lang Holdings LLP. He paused for effect. The sole proprietor of Lang Holdings LLP is Ms. Eva Langford. The air crackled. One board member choked on his coffee. My father's face went from ruddy to a ghastly shade of pale. Michael stared, mouth agape, looking from the papers to me and back again as if he couldn't process the information. My mother looked like she might faint. Langford Innovations, I stated, stepping forward, is for all intents and purposes insolvent. Its liabilities far exceed its assets. However, I continued, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. I'm not here to initiate bankruptcy proceedings. I'm here to rebuild it, under new leadership. I let that sink in. As the primary creditor and de facto majority shareholder, I am exercising my right to call an immediate emergency vote to restructure the board and appoint a new chief executive officer. I then laid out concisely and powerfully my vision for Langford Innovations, a radical overhaul integration of modern tech leveraging synergies with Langford Secure Systems, a clear path back to profitability and genuine innovation. It was a plan born of deep knowledge, not desperate hope. The existing board members, men who understood finance even if they'd been too complacent for too long, saw the undeniable logic. More importantly, they saw a lifeline. When the vote was called, it was swift and unanimous. My father didn't even try to vote against it. He just sat there poleaxed. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been inverted with surgical precision. I was now the CEO of Langford Innovations. I turned my attention to my family. They looked small, diminished. Richard, I said, using his first name, the formality, a deliberate distancing. Your tenure as CEO is over, effective immediately. Please clear your desk by the end of the day. He sputtered. You can't. I can, and I have, I replied coolly. I turned to my mother. Eleanor, your services as Vice President of Public Relations are also no longer required. Your access to company systems will be revoked within the hour. Her face crumpled. Eva, how could you? Then Michael. He was actually trembling. And Michael, I said, my voice devoid of any warmth. Chief Technology Officer, I think not. That title requires a level of competence you've yet to demonstrate. Your employment is terminated. Michael finally found his voice, a reedy, indignant shout. You can't do this. This is our company. Grandfather built this. It was your company to run into the ground. I corrected him, my voice like chipped ice. Now it's mine. Bought and paid for with capital earned through actual innovation and hard work. Much like, I added, letting the words hang in the air, the roof over your heads that I apparently financed for the last 5 years. Sam, a wave of satisfaction, cold and pure, washed over me. However, I continued, a cruel little smile playing on my lips, out of, let's call it, a residual familial sentimentality. I let my gaze linger on each of them. I am prepared to offer you all positions within the new Langford Innovations, entry-level, naturally commensurate with your demonstrable skills. I paused, savoring the moment. Richard, we have an opening in the archival records department. It involves cataloging old schematics, quiet work. Eleanor, the main reception desk, needs coverage. Your people's skills might be an asset there. And Michael, I looked directly at him. The mailroom is looking for an assistant. sorting and delivery. It could build character. The sheer unadulterated humiliation on their faces was a sight to behold. Karma didn't just come for them, it brought an entire army of legally binding documents and deeply ironic job offers. My father finally exploded, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You viper! You ungrateful whelp! After everything we've done for you—" My mother began to weep, not quiet, dignified tears, but noisy, theatrical sobs. "Eva, how could you be so cruel to your own family? You're tearing us apart. What will people say? Done for me or to me, Eleanor?" I asked, my voice dangerously soft. "Let's talk about what people will say when they hear you sold my house, my home, out from under me without my knowledge to fund this monument to mismanagement." I let my eyes sweep the room, ensuring the other board members heard every word. "Yes, 317 Waverly Hill Road. The house I bought, I renovated, I paid the mortgage on. Sold, you said in your email, for the good of the family." Their faces, if possible, paled further. The other board members looked distinctly uncomfortable, some even disgusted. "Oh, and speaking of Waverly Hill," days, I reached into my briefcase and retrieved a slim folder. I slid it across the polished table. It landed with a soft thud in front of my father. "That's the new deed to the property. I repurchased it this morning." Funny how quickly things can be bought back when you have actual capital, isn't it? And not capital siphoned off from family members under false pretenses. I smiled a bright predatory flash. "The locks will be changed by evening. You'll need to arrange to collect your personal belongings. I suggest you do it promptly." The public humiliation was complete. The board members were silent witnesses to the entire brutal dismantling of the Langford dynasty. My father simply stared at the deed, his hands limp at his sides. My mother's sobs subsided into choked gasps. Michael looked like he'd been physically struck. I stood gathering my papers, the new CEO. "This meeting is adjourned. My new executive team, handpicked for competence, not nepotism, will be in place by Monday. Richard, Eleanor, Michael." I gave them one last lingering look. "I expect your decisions on my generous job offers by then, though frankly, I'm not holding my breath." I turned and walked out, her Newman following. The silence I left behind was more damning than any shout. Justice wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal, meticulously planned and flawlessly executed. And it tasted like victory. The boardroom door clicked shut behind me, leaving a maelstrom of shock and shattered pride in my wake. I didn't need to be there to imagine the scene, my father apoplectic, finally grasping the totality of his defeat. My mother, her carefully constructed world, crumbling, resorting to hysterics. Michael oscillating between petulant rage and slack-jawed disbelief. The remaining board members, I suspected, would make their exits as quickly and quietly as possible, eager to distance themselves from the Langford family implosion. As predicted, the attempts at damage control and manipulation began almost immediately. My phone started buzzing before I even reached the lift. My mother. I let it go to voicemail, then again and again. Later, when I listened to the messages in the quiet of my Corinthia suite, they were a torrent of tearful accusations, pleas for reconsideration, invocations of family, and dire warnings about my father's fragile health, a condition I noted that hadn't prevented him from orchestrating the sale of my house. My father, true to form, apparently tried a different tack. Newman informed me later that Richard had made several blustering calls to his old contacts, even attempting to rally minority shareholders, whose holdings were now largely irrelevant, with wild claims of a hostile takeover by his ungrateful, power-hungry daughter. He found no traction. My business plan for Langford Innovations, which Newman had discreetly circulated to key stakeholders, was sound, forward-thinking, and most importantly, backed by substantial capital and a proven track record with LSS. The business community respects strength and success, not sentimentality and failure. Michael's response was a mix of sullen silence and impotent fury. He sent me a single typo-ridden text message. "You always wanted to be part of LI, didn't you? Well, now you've wrecked it for everyone. I hope you're happy." I didn't bother to reply. His version of wrecked was my version of salvaged. My response to their attempts to engage to guilt, to threaten, was swift and uniformly firm. Through Newman, I sent them formal termination letters outlining their severance package's statutory minimum, as per the law, nothing more, and reiterated the deadline for accepting the entry-level job offers. I also included a polite but unequivocal notice regarding the collection of their belongings from 317 Waverly Hill Road, specifying a time frame, after which any remaining items would be professionally packed and placed in storage at their expense. The locks at Waverly Hill were indeed changed by that evening. I stood on the doorstep, the new keys feeling cool and solid in my palm. The house felt different, lighter somehow, as if a heavy, oppressive presence had been lifted. It was mine again, unequivocally. My mother eventually got through to me on the phone. Her voice, stripped of its usual PR gloss, was raw with a desperation that almost sounded genuine. "Eva, darling, please. Your father he's beside himself. You're tearing this family apart. Think of our reputation. What will people think of you treating your own parents this way? Eleanor." I said, my voice calm and steady. "The decisions made were a direct consequence of business realities and a long, well-documented history of your collective actions and choices. This isn't about tearing a family apart. It's about ending a cycle of exploitation and disrespect. The job offers stand. My decision regarding the company and the house is final." I paused, then added, "As for what people will think, I imagine they'll think it's high time someone brought some accountability to Langford Innovations and to the Langford family." I ended the call before she could reply. Boundary setting, I was learning, was a muscle that grew stronger with use. Support arrived from unexpected quarters. Several mid-level managers and engineers at Langford Innovations, long stifled under my father's archaic leadership, and Michael's ineptitude, reached out to me discreetly via LinkedIn or LSS contacts. They expressed relief, cautious optimism, and a willingness to work hard under new leadership. One of the more progressive board members who had witnessed the showdown called me personally. "Eva," he said, his voice tinged with admiration. "That was remarkable. You have a spine of steel. Langford Innovations might actually have a future now. Count on my support." The news of the takeover, framed as a dynamic leadership change and strategic acquisition by Lang Holdings, began to circulate in the financial press. My PR team at LSS, working in conjunction with a new interim team at LI, carefully managed the narrative. It was about revitalization, innovation, and a bright future for a legacy brand, skillfully omitting the messy family drama for public consumption, though a few well-sourced rumors inevitably painted a more colorful picture in city gossip circles. In the short term, the changes were dramatic. My parents and Michael had to vacate Waverly Hill. I learned through a reluctant aunt that they had moved into a small rented flat in a far less fashionable part of London, a stark contrast to their former life. The reality of their financial situation, stripped of the LI expense accounts and the illusion of wealth, was apparently a brutal adjustment. That first week after the confrontation was a whirlwind of activity. Meetings with new department heads, assessments of LI's actual state, reassuring clients and suppliers. But in the quiet moments alone in my hotel suite or walking through the empty rooms of Waverly Hill, a profound sense of weary justice settled over me. It wasn't the giddy elation of a simple victory, but something deeper, more complex. It was the satisfaction of a problem meticulously solved, of an injustice finally comprehensively addressed. Justice wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal, and I was finally eating, I had thought, in the boardroom. Now I felt the deep, resonant satisfaction of that truth. I had not only reclaimed my house and my stolen investments, I had reclaimed my narrative, my power, and my self-respect. The silence in Waverly Hill was no longer a symbol of my solitary childhood, but of peace, ownership, and a future I would define on my own terms. 2 years sped by, marked by relentless work, strategic rebuilding, and a quiet, profound personal transformation. Langford Innovations, under the umbrella of Lang Holdings and my direct CEO-ship, was almost unrecognizable from the failing relic it had been. We'd streamlined operations, invested heavily in actual research and development, attracted top talent who were thrilled not to be working under Michael, and launched several genuinely innovative products that were making serious waves in the tech industry. We even found synergies with Langford Secure Systems, creating integrated solutions that were unique in the market. LI was profitable, respected, and its future was bright. My future. Eva Langford was no longer just the cybersecurity girl or Richard Langford's other child. I was a recognized leader in the tech world, featured in business journals, not for family drama, but for the remarkable turnaround of Langford innovations and the continued global success of LSS. I was known for my sharp intellect, my decisive leadership, and my unwillingness to suffer fools, a trait honed perhaps in the crucible of my family. Waverly Hill was my sanctuary. I had renovated it further, but this time purely to my own taste, filling it with light art and comfortable spaces for both work and relaxation. The ghosts of past grievances had been exorcised. It was a home truly and unequivocally mine, a place of peace and quiet strength. I'd even started tentatively dating someone new, a kind, intelligent architect who admired my strength rather than being intimidated by it, and who knew nothing of the Langford family saga beyond what was public record. It was refreshing. I was learning to build healthy relationships, both personal and professional. And what of my family karma, as they say, can be a meticulous accountant? My father, Richard, never accepted the entry-level job offer. His pride wouldn't allow it. He attempted to leverage his old contacts to start a consulting business, but the world had moved on. His advice was outdated, his reputation tarnished by the spectacular collapse of his leadership at LI. The venture failed miserably. He lived modestly, a shadow of his former blustering self, his health reportedly declining under the weight of bitterness and thwarted ambition. Old acquaintances offered pity, but the respect he had once commanded, however unearned, was gone. What goes around doesn't just come around, it multiplies. I reflected one evening looking out at my garden. In his case, it multiplied his irrelevance. My mother, Eleanor, also refused the receptionist position. She clung desperately to the vestiges of her former social life, but without the Langford Innovations expense account and the status of being the CEO's wife, she found herself increasingly on the periphery. Her carefully cultivated network proved shallow, more interested in position than person. She lived with Richard in that small rented flat. I imagine their days were filled with strained silences and mutual recriminations. She still sent me terse, guilt-tripping birthday and Christmas cards. I responded with polite, brief acknowledgments sent via my assistant. The emotional drawbridge remained firmly up. Michael's trajectory was surprisingly the most complex. After a year of drifting, blaming me, the world, and his own bad luck, he apparently hit rock bottom. The details were sparse, relayed through a cousin, but it involved maxed-out credit cards and an eviction notice. Then something shifted. Humbled, perhaps finally forced to confront his own mediocrity, he took a very junior tech support role at a small, entirely unrelated company in another city. He was by all accounts struggling, but actually learning, the value of a day's work, the sting of genuine accountability. About 18 months after the takeover, I received a short, awkwardly worded email from him. It wasn't quite an apology, more a grudging acknowledgement of his own failings and a hesitant congratulations on what I'd done with LI. I replied with a brief civil note. We weren't friends, not even close to being siblings in any meaningful sense, but it was a tiny crack of light in a wall of darkness. Perhaps there was hope for him as an individual, even if the family unit was irrevocably broken. The old toxic family dynamic was shattered beyond repair, and for that I was profoundly grateful. I maintained polite but firm boundaries. There were no more fraught family holidays, no more demands on my time or resources, no more casual dismissals of my worth. I was free. My new support system consisted of my loyal teams at LSS and LI trusted friends like Sarah and my ever-reliable counsel, her Newman, who had become a valued confidant. Looking back, the journey had been brutal, but the lessons invaluable. I learned that true strength isn't just about building successful companies. It's about defining your own worth, even when those closest to you refuse to see it. It's about drawing lines in the sand and defending them fiercely if necessary. Being underestimated was their biggest mistake. I often thought. It became my greatest weapon. They never saw me coming because they never truly saw me at all. And in their blindness, they gave me the space to plan to build and ultimately to triumph, not just over them, but over the years of self-doubt they had instilled. I was no longer the invisible daughter. I was the architect of my own destiny, and the view from the top was spectacular. So what's the deep moral of this story? The takeaway from all the corporate maneuvering and family wreckage? It's this. Your worth is not and never will be determined by those who refuse to see it. It is inherent. Sometimes the most profound act of self-love is to walk away from toxic family dynamics, or if circumstances demand it, to strategically dismantle the structures that perpetuate that toxicity. Being underestimated. Let me tell you, it can be a superpower. Use their willful blindness, their arrogant assumptions as the cloak for your own ascent. True strength isn't just about weathering the storm. It's about emerging from it and rebuilding your world on your own unshakable terms. Have you ever had to choose between what you were told was family loyalty and your own self-preservation, your own truth? What would you have done in my shoes, faced with that email in Berlin? How do you cope when you're made to feel like the invisible one, the afterthought in your own family's narrative? If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the forgotten child, the overachiever dismissed with a pat on the head, or the one who had to fight for every scrap of recognition, drop a comment and subscribe. You're not alone in this. Your experiences are valid and your voice matters. Share this story if you believe, as I do, that everyone deserves to be seen, valued, and respected for who they are, especially by their own family. Hit that subscribe button if you're ready to hear more stories of turning betrayal into triumph and reclaiming your personal power. And please comment with your own family drama story if you feel comfortable. Let's build a community where we support each other in rewriting our narratives, transforming pain into power. Never ever let anyone else define your limits or your value. The truth of who you are, your capabilities, your resilience, that truth will always eventually come to light. And trust me, when it does, it's a sight to behold. So go out there and build your own empire, whatever that looks like for you, even if it feels like you're starting with nothing but the ashes of what you thought you knew. Let's create a space right here where being underestimated is simply understood as the quiet, unassuming prelude to an absolutely epic comeback. Stay tuned for more stories of resilience, strategy, and yes, that sweet, sweet justice we all deserve a taste of.